Welcome to the Ideagen Global Future of Summit, live here in Washington, D.C. I am honored and privileged to have a Gonzaga College High School graduate, Brody Mullins, also an investigative reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Side gig, right? Compared to what you did at Gonzaga. Of course. And author of an incredible new book called The Wolves of K Street. Brody, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here.
Appreciate it.
It's an incredible time, and I know the millions of folks that will watch this interview on Ideagen TV will be interested in hearing about why. Like, what is this book about, and why did you write it?
Yeah, so this book is about a couple things. It's about the modern lobbying industry in Washington. It's about the rise of corporate power in Washington to the point where companies have a very strong voice in DC, and at a time when labor unions and environmental groups and other sort of government organizations don't have as much influence in Washington. And it's also about how lobbying has changed from the era of smoke-filled rooms to today, when lobbying is actually more democratic and is more trying to get voters and constituents to rally behind issues and policies that companies support.
And so, love the Wall Street Journal. I'm a Luddite. I receive the hard copy in my driveway every morning, and it's never wet, even if it's raining. It's wrapped up in two individually wrapped bags if it's raining, sealed. And I'm really impressed by it. And I'm still doing that. And I hope
that's not my job.
That's not your job, but you're part of the entity that delivers that. So the news and the content in the Wall Street Journal is phenomenal. And I want to applaud you on all the work you're doing, especially all the investigative reporting.
Thank you.
Which I believe has served as a nexus for your inspiration to write a book.
Yeah, so I've covered lobbying and business and industry in Washington for 20 years. I never thought I would write a book. I didn't think I had the patience to work up something for that long. But in 2017 or 18, I'd written a couple stories about some lobbies I found really interesting, and thought that it was worth more. And kind of the more I dug in, the more interested I got. I teamed up with my brother Luke, also a Gonzaga graduate, and we decided to write this book together.
That's a brother's tale here. This is incredible. And so you wrote the book with your brother Luke Mullins, class of '96, Gonzaga. You're class of '92, as I understand it. How did your collaborative journalism styles, as we look out over Washington, thinking about all the journalists that have preceded you, icons, legends, how did that collaboration work?
It's funny. When we first got into it, I think we were both a little worried. There's a lot of people who go into business together who end up never talking to each other again, and we were a little worried about that. It turns out, though, that being brothers was a sort of a good match, because we're sort of used to and sort of skilled in getting in knockdown, drag out fights and then recovering from them.
Oh yeah, sure. Always recovering. Yeah.
So there were plenty of times when we disagreed, where we got in fights, where we hung up on each other, where we yelled at each other, and without fail, one or the other one, a few minutes later, would pick up the phone and say, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that," and we'd move forward. So in that way, it worked out well. Also, we had it turned out very complementary styles in terms of reporting and writing. I like to dig deep and have lots of sources and friends on Capitol Hill and in Washington and in the lobbying world who I could speak with. So I sort of did more of the reporting. And he's a much better writer. Okay. So I would sort of write first draft or like quick and dirty, and then he would sort of take it into his magical workshop and come up with with really great chapters and stories. So also our book weaves together 4 or 5 different lobbyists over time. Each one of them could be their own book. They come in and out of various decades and various periods and highs and lows. And Luke was able to weave all those stories together, where they all start together and they all end together.
Wow.
That's something I don't think I could have done.
Wow. It takes patience, and it's a different skill set on some level, right? And so what I find fascinating about the book as well is that it's focused on people. It's not really focused on the process, which is, the byproduct. Why is that? And why did you choose these 5 people?
So, we're writing about a really important topic to our country, which is business and lobbying and how they're affected by campaign donations and money. But all those topics are heavy, and it can be dense and can be boring, quite frankly. So we realized if people to read this book, it has to be good. It has to be readable. It has to be a book about people. So we found a couple of really interesting characters, all of whom ended up in scandal, and they telling their stories helps explain how lobbying has changed, how corporations have become more powerful in Washington. And so the idea was like, let's make this as interesting as possible.
And that you've done, and that you've done. And so, in terms of the surprises, what were some of the, again, looking out over Washington? I mean, what were some of the surprises that came out of your reporting and out of your research?
There's a whole bunch of surprises. One to me that's most fascinating is that companies are incredibly influential right now, and they were incredibly influential 100 years ago. And I sort of assumed that they were influential in the intervening period, and it turns out they were not. They were sort of living in an era right now where companies are at near their peak in influence. But that wasn't the case in the 1970s and before the 1970s. From the 1930s to the 1970s, companies had very little influence in Washington. They didn't really have lobbyists. They didn't really get involved in politics. And during that time, from the New Deal era to the Great Society era, the government grew, exponentially. Tons of new laws and regulations were made on companies, regulated companies and industries in order to help consumers and the American people. In the 1970s, the economy collapsed and companies saw profits go away. And so they said, hey, what are we going to do about this? They looked around and realized that they thought the government was the problem. The government was crimping profits through regulations. So they, for the first time, really invested in Washington in terms of hiring lobbyists, starting offices in DC, investing in campaign donations. And from that period in the late 70s to now, companies have been incredibly powerful. So what's interesting about that is that this period may now be coming to an end. That companies are getting attacked now on the left and the right, whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Lena Khan on both sides. They're under the gun more and more on industries from pharmaceuticals to big tech to railroads to almost everything. And so we'll see, but this era could be coming to an end. I think that's what it makes.
That's fascinating, and we've had some sidebar conversations around what the forces are that may be impacting all of that, but it's really just amazing to hear. And so, what about the challenges? What was the obstacle? Those things that you came across that you could not have perceived as possible.
One of the obstacles that we had, which I don't consider a huge problem, but none of the people who we were writing about wanted to talk to us or would talk to us. A couple of them, because they were dead, couldn't do anything about that. But a couple others didn't want, a couple of reporters snooping around their lives for a couple of years. But in a way, from a reporting perspective, that can make things better, because instead of just taking someone's story verbatim from them, we had to work around them and interview their family members, their college roommates, and their former colleagues, and their people they work with, their enemies and their friends, and that created for us a much better, richer story. Because we had to go find the warts, basically.
Wow. And so, given the current political climate, again, overlooking Washington here, what impact do you and Luke hope? What impact do you hope this book will have on the process and the people?
I think one way that lobbying and the industry can change or improve is to have a little more disclosure. Right now, we have disclosure of people who are registered lobbyists, the people who actually talk to members of Congress on a day-to-day basis. But so much of lobbying now is outside of Washington and is trying to convince regular voters and constituents to support a particular policy or to oppose one. And that type of lobbying, which is really where the industry is going, is not registered or not disclosed at all. So we don't know who those people are. Whereas again, registered lobbyists who can have a bad name in Washington, they have to fill out a form every quarter that lists their name, their clients, how much money they're making, what bills they're lobbying for or against. So a lot is known about them. And it seems like the same rule should apply to all lobbyists.
That's right. It should apply to all lobbyists. You're right. And so, without giving too much away in the book, because it's an incredible read and certain, without a doubt, to be a blockbuster movie, as you've heard me say many times, how do we, as American citizens, help take control back from the process that's now developed? How do we get that control back?
Well, the good news here is that the people almost always win when they come together and talk to their members of Congress. I mean, I've been a reporter in Washington for 25 years or so. And one of the things I know for sure, the only thing in fact I know for sure in Washington, is that a member of Congress will do anything to get reelected. A member of Congress will do whatever they think his or her constituents want. So if 51% of constituents want a member of Congress to do something, and they relay that message to a member of Congress, they will follow. So that people still have the power.
Yeah.
It's just that oftentimes people sit on their hands and don't get involved and don't get active.
Yeah.
And constituents just need to get more involved and more active and keep keep in touch or talk to or pressure their own members of Congress.
Incredible. And so the most important question is, where can folks find this book? Where can they purchase this like yesterday?
Right. So the book is now available anywhere at your local bookstore or on Amazon or anywhere you find your books.
There you go.
Great.
The Wolves of K Street. Buy it today. Watch for the movie. Thank you.